Welcome everyone. My name is Fatima Al-Shamsi and I am the Space Policy Specialist at UAE Space Agency. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our session. As His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Prime Minister of UAE and the ruler of Dubai said, our space mission is aimed at serving humanity. Space is the gateway to science and science is the driver to future economy. And with a strong and visionary leadership at the forefront of encouraging on to achieve the impossible in space innovation, came the countless hours of dedicated efforts from engineers to scientists to enthusiast citizens in space science and technology. We will share our space journey in transforming the UAE dream into reality. But first, it is my great honor to have the Director General of the UAE Space Agency, Dr. Mohammed Al-Ahbabi, with us today. He is also a board member of the IAF as well as the ISU. We have also here with us my fellow colleagues from the agency, all of whom are ISU alumni. We have Talal Al-Qaisi with us, Hamd Al-Hosani and Sumaya Al-Hajri. But before we go on with our speakers, I would like to welcome Dr. Mohammed to give the keynote speech. Doctor, you are on mute. If you can just unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we're having some issues with Dr. Al-Ahbabi's speech or his audio. Let me see here.
Yeah.
Okay, we see you now, Your Excellency, if you can just unmute. We can't hear him. If the actual host, Kalindi, if you can unmute him from your side, that would be great.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I think I have to repeat. Sorry about this glitch, but good morning or greeting basically from UAE, and it's a great opportunity to join you this morning. It's a Saturday, but we do appreciate this opportunity from ISU. I'm sure you are very happy and very excited to hear about UAE Space Program, especially in the light of our recent launch to Mars. And I would like to start, basically.
I think he was muted again. If the host can unmute Dr. Okay, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Could I continue?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, I would like to give this an overview, but I will leave the details to my team, who are, I'm very proud of them. In fact, I call them the dream team. They will explain it, better than me. However, in terms of introduction of UAE Space Program, UAE has identified space as part of its current and future. This is why probably you might wonder, not just only you, but a lot of people asking, why UAE is investing in space, especially in the light of our recent launch of our astronaut, our mission to Mars. A lot of programs and initiatives. Basically, the government of UAE has, as I mentioned, identified space as part of its current and future. We think that space is a great platform for innovation. It's also important mechanism for space diplomacy and also for inspiring young people, not only in our country, but across the region. UAE try through its space program a number of initiatives to demonstrate that it's possible, especially in this part of the world, in spite of what's happening and the challenges. But still, there's a hope. If you work on something and if you have a vision and you have a plan and great team, things can be accomplished. And this is where UAE try to demonstrate to our people and people across the region and also around the world that even no matter how small you are, you can contribute significantly, especially in space. UAE now probably the youngest space nation that sent probe to Mars. But also we are very proud and active and we are contributing on the international space map in terms of space policy projects, and we are proud of that. And we try to show this, that it's possible, not just only, you can dream about, but you can turn it to reality. So we are proud of our space sector today, which is considered to be the largest in our region. We have 10 satellites in orbit, and we have 8 satellites in projects. We launched our own homemade satellite in 2018. 2019, we launched our own astronaut, Hazza al-Mansouri, to the International Space Station. This year, we also launched the Hope probe to Mars, and I'm sure a lot of you heard about this. It's a scientific mission. It's an orbiter that will go to Mars, collect data about the atmosphere of Mars. We are using this as I mentioned, to inspire our young people, the people around the world, and also to learn and engage and network with the international space community. We do believe that space is all about cooperation, and we will continue to do so. We are hungry for knowledge. We are hungry for technology, and this is why we have signed more than 30 cooperation agreements with almost every space nations on Earth. We will continue, realizing and utilizing our friendship, partnership, and also network. Education also is important for us. I am proud to be part of the ISU advisory board, but also my team is enjoyed and learned a lot and engaging with the future space leaders, people like you. We will continue developing our space sector and together we will do much, much better. In fact, we can go further and faster. I will be more than happy to continue in the future working with ISU, with my team. And thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity to talk about UAE Space Program. And I will leave it to my team to give you more details. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Talal, if you can please tell us a brief about your ISU experience,
Sure.
your role in the agency. So
Absolutely.
the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much, Fatma, and thank you, Your Excellency, for your kind words about our team. I really feel lucky to be part of such a team. The thing with me is I'm a non-engineer. I'm one of the few non-engineering employees at the UAE Space Agency, so I'm usually intimidated by the engineers and the knowledge and the experience that they have. And my role in particular is to support with strategic projects and bringing ideas to the table about how we could collaborate with other countries, and then also figure out what types of programs we can be a part of. And a lot of what I do is to support with diplomacy as well. So I'm always trying to find ways in our soft power and public diplomacy to help advance the UAE's interests in space holistically. And so just to build on a little bit of what His Excellency Dr. Al-Ahbabi, our Director General, mentioned, the agency is structured in a very light way. We are only about 60 people as an agency, and we leverage and lean on the experience and the wider space sector in the country. So we've had, prior to the establishment of the agency in 2014, a fairly vibrant space sector when it came to the telecommunications end of things with Yasat and Thuraya, and then also with the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, who were actually developing and manufacturing Earth observation satellites. And they had this very interesting journey through learning and knowledge transfer, where they were able to work with partners internationally and then acquire the knowledge to be able to build what ended up being the first UAE-made satellite in the UAE by UAE nationals, Khalifa Sat, that was launched a couple of years ago. And so that natural transition of knowledge and the acquisition of knowledge and human capital is what we were after behind in that program. And that naturally then transcended into the capability development angle that we took when we embarked on the Mars mission that was announced simultaneously to the announcement of the space agency in 2014. And I'm very proud to say that, you know, everything went exactly according to plan. We were able to get everything done and on the launch pad, and then launched by July of 2020, you know, just less than a month ago. And it was really not an easy feat. 6 years to build something that's an interplanetary spacecraft, something going from a spacecraft that was for Earth observation in LEO to something that's interplanetary, that had some really important science that it was going to derive and help contribute to the international science community. So I can get into some of the science details in the Q&A if that's of an interest, but just more broadly on the space, the evolution of the space agency in the UAE. We started off in 2014, and that was kind of like the startup phase for the first 2-3 years, and then we went into what we can consider, if you're looking analogous to a startup company, to the growth phase, and now we're in that point where we're going from growth to scaling, hopefully. And in order to scale, one major important item that we are very interested in is the investment promotion and building out the ecosystem. So one of the areas that I truly focus on the most at the agency is how do we ensure that we're incentivizing using hard incentives and soft incentives, whether it be the regulatory framework that we have that's conducive to business, or the different types of you know, incubators and accelerators that we can put together to help it attract business to space business to the UAE, and then also grow organic businesses in the UAE that can contribute to the space sector. And one of the things that we've really focused on is leaning on the heritage that we have in other industries, and how space can benefit those other industries, and how those other industries can benefit space. So one good example is the energy sector. You know, we've obviously, in our 50-year evolution as a country, we've had a big focus on the energy sector that has enabled the diversification strategy that we've embarked on. And so there are many parallels in the energy sector for some of the things we might be wanting to do with ISRU, for instance, in the future. And so looking at those parallels and looking at those applications, trying to focus on the spin-offs that could be produced are all parts of what we are really focused on right now in investment promotion and ecosystem development. And then lastly, on my personal ISU experience, I think this was one of the most important decisions I made. I unfortunately, because of my travel schedule back then and the you know, demands on my schedule, I couldn't do the longer program. So I did the executive program in Seattle last year, and I found it to be remarkable for someone like me, who didn't really have the technical background but understood things without knowing and really truly grasping the foundations and fundamentals. And that accelerated program within 1 week allowed me to fill in so many gaps in my knowledge, and allows me to now have conversations with engineers where I can pretend to know more than I really do. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you, Dr. Fatma.
Thank you, Talal. Okay, I would like now to share my screen. Okay. Now it's my time to give you a brief about my role at the agency. But first, I would like to thank ISU for the amazing knowledge gained and the friendships that I got to make during my participation at the Executive Space Course in 2019 and the 2020 Southern Hemisphere Space Studies Program. I can see that we have Zabanka with us here as well as Noon. So I made great memories with you, and inshallah, the friendship will last forever. And yeah, I believe that pictures speak louder than words. So here are some of the pictures that I wanted to share from my memory. But now it's time to give you a brief about the National Space Strategy. So this is the main focus of my role at the agency. As you all may know, space policy is an essential pillar for the advancement of any space program. It sets forth the vision and strategic focus at a national level. And from here comes my role in space-related policies, and specifically in rolling out of the National Space Strategy 2030, a sectorial strategy that seeks to establish UAE as a major global hub for space science and technology through investing in building national expertise and creating scientific, legislative, and economic environment that is stimulating and attractive for space projects. The strategy sets the general framework for UAE space industry and activities, including government activities related to space, commercial activities, and scientific activities carried out by public and private sector operators, as well as academic institutions, including R&D centers. So I have a few slides that I would like to share. The first is the regulatory framework of the space sector. In 2014, as Talal said, the agency was established, and with the establishment of the agency, the team worked on developing the national space policy in 2016. And the policy gives an idea about the hopes and the ambitions that the UAE would like to achieve in the space sector. However, it did not give us the house on how to achieve those aspirations. And here came the need for this national space strategy in 2019. It was approved. It includes 71 initiatives, which will be implemented within the year of 2020 until 2030. So it is an integral part that gives the house for the national operators, as well as in collaboration with our private sector. When developing the national space strategy, we worked on detailing what are the space activities that we would like to focus on in the 10-year plan. We identified 23 space activities, as you can see in the screen. But then within the focus groups, we identified 13 space activities. Those 13 space activities are the ones that we will be focusing on within the coming 10 years. And they are formulated in terms of initiatives. And you will see that when I come to the strategic objectives. So as you can see, R&D activities are of importance for us: space exploration, small satellites, as well as large satellites, including other activities. Now, what the UAE vision is, the UAE would like to be one of the most pioneering and advanced countries in the field of space. And how are we going to achieve that? Through the 6 strategic objectives. The first 3 strategic objectives are more of areas of focus, whereas the remaining 3 strategic objectives are enablers. They will enable us to achieve those areas of focus. So the first strategic objective is the provision of competitive and leading space services. So we are focusing on space services. The second is in the development of local capacities in technology and manufacturing, as well as R&D. The third is the inspiring space scientific and exploration missions. The fourth is creating space culture and expertise. We are talking here about the expertise. The government has invested a lot in raising awareness within the last period. And now we are focusing on tapping on this local expertise in the space field. And of course, the space sector relies heavily on international relations. And here comes the strategic objective number 5, which is to promote effective local and global partnerships and investments in the space industry, And last but not least, having the supporting and legislative framework and infrastructure, which will enable us to achieve all of these objectives. Now, as you can see, we have divided those the initiatives to be under 18 programs. All of the 18 programs will include 71 initiatives. And of course, 71 initiatives within 10 years, we don't have much time. So how are we going to ensure effective implementation within the timeline that we have? We have identified a number of tools. One, which is the effective stewardship by the UAE Space Agency. So it's on us as an agency to ensure having effective communication with the stakeholders in the country, as well as at an international stage. And I am happy to say that today we have more than 100 champions at a local level where we are coordinating and discussing the different initiatives with them, and they are actually from more than 25 entities in the UAE. The second tool, which is the effective and active stakeholder involvement and coordination. We have a national supervision committee. The supervision committee includes members from various entities, such as our operators, Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, and of course, members from other government entities, such as the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the main focus and main role of this committee is for us to present to them what is being implemented at a national level, what has been done. We would like to tap and take advantage of their expertise in their own domains and get their insights on the opportunities or the gaps that we might face. Now, of course, we will have a constant and periodic assessment to identify the gaps and opportunities. We will not wait until the end of 2030 to incorporate any new technology that we see is important for us. We will review and have a revision of the strategy at a periodic timeline. We have the initiative implementation charter. This is, of course, when we reach the implementation phase with our stakeholders. And of course, it gives a detailed overview of the exact steps that needs to be carried in order to achieve the specified objective of each initiative. And last but not least, we have the risk management plan during the strategy implementation. This is for us to avoid any, let me say, incident, to have a mitigation plan for them. Of course, there are many great achievements that has been done within the past period, but with the strategy, I am hopeful that in the next decades, those achievements will be increased tremendously. And this, of course, relies on us as a UAE agency staff to ensure that we deliver the vision of the government, and we reach out to all of our stakeholders, as well as, of course, there are other initiatives that we will work on achieving ourselves. This is the end of my presentation. I wanted to keep it light and short. Now, let us move to Hamda Al-Hosani. Hamda, let me stop sharing. Hamda, please, if you can share your experience as an ISU alumni and then your role in the agency. Thank you all.
Thank you, Fatma and ISU family, for this opportunity. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. So I joined the Southern Hemisphere Space Study Program in Adelaide, Australia in 2019 when I was a student. And after graduating, I have joined the UAE Space Agency as a Space Activities Licensing Executive. And today, I'll give you a brief overview of the UAE Space Regulatory Framework. So after the establishment of the agency in 2014, there was a need of developing a regulatory framework for the national space sector, in which the two main considerations or inputs were the international law, where the treaties establish an international principles and framework for the use and exploration of space, and the UAE leadership vision, which was driving directions and highlight the importance of the space sector and the government support for it, and clarifies the principles, goals, and priorities desired by the sector. In 2016, the UAE Space Agency has issued its International Space Policy, which identifies the main principles and the UAE ambitions in the space sector and paves the way for a federal national law to enforce the desired goals and principles. And followed by that, in 2019, the UAE Space Agency has issued its National Space Strategy 2030, which my colleague Fatma was presenting about, which translates the principles and ambitions in the policy into a set of national programs and initiatives to be implemented by the UAE Space Agency to enhance the national space sector and its role. In addition, the UAE has launched the investment promotion plan, which is based on the national space policy, which called for a comprehensive approach to attract and promote investment in the space industry, encouraging and facilitating commercial space activities, and establishing the UAE as a major regional and global hub for space activities and advanced research and development, which my colleague Talal was mentioning. And in December 2019, the federal law concerning the regulation of space sector has been issued to create the appropriate regulatory environment to achieve the national space policy objectives in the UAE, which will be followed by space regulations and procedures. The UAE Space Agency aims to establish a comprehensive legal framework to regulate the national space sector on a well-advised legal basis. We are also working towards creating an attractive business environment for investments in the space sector. In this regard, we have conducted a number of local and international studies, and in cooperation with our stakeholders, we have been working on a set of regulations that governs the UAE space sector and to clearly define the requirements for conducting space activities in the UAE in a safe and a secured manner. These regulations include the regulation and authorization of space activities that aims to set out the different types of authorization, terms and conditions, and procedure to obtain a space activity authorization in accordance with the standards and conditions stipulated in the law and regulations, as well as the international treaties and laws. In addition to the registration of space object regulation, which aims to set out the legislations and procedures to register space object in case they were registered under the UAE in the National Registry and in the UN International Registry. In addition to that, we have the Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines, which aims to encourage the mitigation of releasing new space debris, which is direct the operator to submit a plan for debris mitigation and periodic reports, which is also proposed a non-obligatory measures based on international best practices and standards. And another regulation on third-party liability insurance, which set out the terms and conditions to regulate, and which we are currently working on. And all of these regulations are currently in the drafting phase. So the UAE space law, deemed to be the first of its kind in the Arab and Islamic level, it aims to create the legislative and regulatory environment in the UAE space sector, in line with the other laws and regulations in the UAE, to facilitate the development of a purposeful and safe space sector. It also sets the clear framework for the rights and duties of the official and establishments operating in this sector, and guarantees the rights of all relevant parties in compliance with international agreements and treaties signed by the UAE. It's characterized by clarity, transparency, and flexibility, and it also aims to protect the UAE's interests through the establishing of a balance between economic and commercial requirements, and to encourage innovation on one hand and ensuring the requirement for safety, security, and environmental protection on the other hand, as well as to drive investment and to promote the participation of the private sector in the space industry. It consists of 9 chapters and 54 articles that regulates the space activities across the country and governs the agency's role in this regard. The law is dealing with the traditional legal issues, as well as it tackles different and new advanced concepts that are garnering the international attention, such as the space resource utilization and exploration, space tourism, and providing logistical services in space. It clarifies the procedure of issuing the authorizations and insurance and the other aspects. So this law aims to set the legal framework to regulate the space sector and to create the appropriate regulatory environment to achieve the national space policy objectives, which includes the promoting of investment and encouraging the participation of the private sector and the academic sector in the space sector, and that supports the implementation of necessary safety, security, and environmental protection measures to enhance the long-term sustainability of space activities, and to support the principle of transparency and the obligation of the UAE to implement the provisions of international treaties and agreements related to the outer space. So the law will be a key factor in opening the door for investments in the national space sector to various global companies due to its legal and regulatory environment, which provides investors with assurance ahead of starting their business and the project in the UAE. And if you are interested to know more about the law, you can scan this barcode and it will take you directly to the national space law.
Thank you, Hamda. Now we have with us Sumaya Al-Hajri. If you can also do the same, introduce yourself, your ISU experience, and your role, please.
Thank you, Fatma. Sure. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. And as well, I would like to thank Dr. Mohammed Al-Ahbabi, His Excellency, for his kind words. Speaking highly of us really made us really honored and feeling so pleased to be here. And I'm happy to join my colleague from the UAE Space Agency in this panel, as always a pleasure. And happy to see a few of my colleagues, friends and TAs from the Space Study Program 2019 in Strasbourg, and a great instructors as well, and professor from the ISU. And let me introduce myself to those who don't know me. My name is Sumaya Al-Hajri, and I'm actually from the UAE Space Agency. I'm heading the space policy and legislation, but currently seconded to the Minister of AI, Artificial Intelligence Office within the UAE Prime Minister Office. And currently I'm heading the governance and data. I am an engineer in the heart and a space lawyer on my mind. Space is always on my mind, and working my way towards prospering AI in the UAE. Let me highlight that as pessimistic the situation as it could be imposed by the COVID-19. It's quite fascinating to see how technology is able to connect us all through this virtual world, and glad to see this conference is happening despite the different challenges that we are facing as citizens of the Earth. It made us realize that we have reached a junction where technology is a necessity in our lives, and coming from both space, AI, technology, I was fortunate to have a better visibility on the progress of these three areas. Being a public policy expert as well, I was keen in diversifying my knowledge by having an interdisciplinary background in engineering, law, diplomacy, economy, and the list will continue to go on. I was so privileged as well to be an ISU alumni, where I have graduated in the Space Study Program of 2019, where I was able to gain this kind of interdisciplinary knowledge in space law, management, business, space medicine as well, astronomy, policy, and there's a lot. But the most important is that I have a friend in every country, and we are still in touch through a texting app until today, and they are sending me text right now. So I would like to share as well my thought. Why starting in space is always a great idea. It is not only because of the scale and the width it has, but also it's because of that space is not easy. And this is something that Dr. Al-Ahbabi has been always telling me. Space is not easy. It's quite hard and expensive. And I realized that when I compare it to whatever I do in technology management. And yes, there is still synergy between space and AI. Space provided a number of policy and regulatory template or blueprint that can be reused in most sectors. And in this case, I am implementing whatever I learned from space into AI. And I can just point a few examples. So the first one is how to regulate technology. So how to regulate technology that are changing rapidly by designing a flexible regulatory framework that provide enough legal certainty to investors and at the same time is not rigid to act as an innovation graveyard. So this is something which we are looking into in terms of agility. And the other one is the idea of space law has been very creative. It's a legal blueprint where I can apply. I am now looking into insurance regulations for third-party liability in space and how it can be a lesson learned to be implemented into autonomous vehicle in the world of AI and artificial intelligence. This model is fascinating, and Hamd Al-Hosni can talk more about it since she's been working really heavily on this area. The third one is probably strategizing investment and microeconomics. So designing and mapping your cluster by balancing the supply and the demand and how to create a profound value by bringing the services closer to the R&D within the value chain. And this way you ensure that you can attract investors and create more investments as well. The fourth area is entrepreneurship culture, which is driven by the passion of space and how the model and how to model that passion in technology and different sectors, and how even to use this existing passion in space to contribute more into other sectors such as technology. In space economy, how to measure the space economy and now only as a contribution to the GDP? Is it only contribution to the GDP, or do we need to look at it as a contribution to the society or to the prosperity and maybe happiness? And just before ending my session, I want to highlight that Jim Bernstein stated in his session yesterday, he said, he was the first NASA administrator that wasn't alive when we went to another world, and he wants to make sure that he is alive. He's the last NASA administrator who has been alive at the time there was no human on another world. And let me complement that by saying, we are living in a world of opportunities as the future unfolds. Don't give up, no matter how doubtful it might appear in the new normal. Saying that, I would like to end by asking the question, isn't it the best time to be alive to see all of this technology progress? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sumaya. Now, we would like to move to the Q&A session. We received few questions. Let me give you one of them. Okay, so we have a question from Mike. What are the UAE views on global picture of commercial space and investment in the space sector? I believe, Talal, you can answer this question.
Sure, yeah. You mean the global picture?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think, you know, we're living in a very interesting time. I always tell people that are unfamiliar with the space sector that we are kind of in this paradigm shift where accessibility to space is becoming a lot easier, and the biggest inhibitors to accessing space in the past, which was mainly cost, obviously, and I think it's a mixture of cost and political will. I think we're seeing the cost part at least decline, which is presenting some very interesting opportunities for newcomers and new entrants into the space domain, be it governments or the commercial sector even. And a lot of these cost efficiencies are being driven by the commercial sector, which is an interesting new dynamic to what traditionally was the case when you had mainly governments as players in the space industry. So with reusable launch vehicles, for example, reusability in general in any form, that's being a key contributor to bringing down the cost and increasing potential access. The other thing is with miniaturization of technology, I think that's presenting an interesting opportunity for things that can be done with much smaller technologies in lower orbits even, that have the same types of efficiencies and they yield the same types of benefits as the much bigger traditional satellites that were there, so to speak. And so when you couple those things, it's easy to see new business models be developed over that newly established infrastructure that's only getting better and getting more cost effective. And so for a country like the UAE, you know, we're always trying to not recreate the wheel or figure out how we can duplicate something that's already been done, but rather to use an analogy of hockey. I spent a lot of time in the US and they used to use this analogy in business a lot. We want to go to where the puck is going rather than where the puck is. And so we kind of see in the next 5 years that this trajectory that's being taken is going to continue to progress. So we want to try to find exactly the sweet spot the UAE can enter when you take into account a lot of these innovations and cost efficiencies. So we can build something and bring something new and novel to the global space exploration effort.
Okay, that's good. I can see there are questions related to the Mars Science mission. They want to know more about it. What's the mission objectives? So again, Talal, to you, I believe you have a good highlight on that, and you will give them the right answers that they are seeking, you know? So
Sure. So with Mars, I mean, it's an orbiter. The idea is to study the atmosphere and the climate. It was announced in 2014, as I mentioned, completed and launched in July of this year. The idea is to have it reach the Martian orbit February of 2021. And 2021 is very special to us because it's symbolic. It's our 50th year anniversary as a country. And what's very interesting about the Mars mission, before we go into the science, is the fact that usually space missions are formed by defining the science questions that need to be answered and then looking to figure out the benefits to justify the costs in a sense. But with the Emirates Mars mission, this traditional logic was inverted by a quest for the UAE to fundamentally redirect the nation's trajectory. So the mission is more for a national development before it was a mission for science. And there was no previous domestic space experience, space exploration experience, so to speak, and then nothing in terms of planetary science capacity and no infrastructure. So all these things had to be developed in line with what we needed to do to accomplish putting together the spacecraft. But the mission itself is going to study the atmosphere, give us a more holistic picture about the escape of hydrogen and carbon dioxide to understand better the climate of Mars in a full day-night cycle, as well as a full year and a global picture. The way it was before is we had like maybe say 2 spots. If you were looking at it analogous to the Earth, the way we were able to answer questions about the climate on Mars is if you take the temperature and look at the climate in Alaska and then in Dubai, and that would infer the Martian climate, and that's not indicative. So I think this mission, with its very unique orbit and with its 3 instruments, an infrared spectrometer, an ultraviolet spectrometer, and an imager, are going to give us that global picture which we've never had before to contribute to the global knowledge base that Mars has. And for us, what's important is we're going to be providing this science data freely to many universities all over the world to be able to analyze and help us with the data once we obtain it.
Good. We have another question from Jonas. So, how will the UAE space initiatives maintain financial sustainability? Sumaya, would you like to answer that?
I mean, I can try, but Talal, I think, is the best person to answer financial and investment related questions. So financial stability is mainly to ensure that whatever the economic situation is, you need to trigger the market open operation within the central bank. So this is something which is on the national level, a national process where we can just regulate or monitor the monetary policy along with the central bank. So this is something which we do. But in terms of space, as we are conducting the survey on space economy, and we measure, well, we have a number of measurements, and one of them is related to the contribution of space to the GDP. In this way, we can understand how can we diversify the GDP away from the oil. So around 30% of the UAE GDP is still related to oil, and we're trying just to diversify it away. And this is through space-related commercial activities. So as we contribute more to the diversification of the GDP, we'll be able to achieve more financial stability. And that's my humble input to this question, but I leave it to the experts within you guys, the space agency.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I can add one element which I think is important. If we're looking at financial sustainability in the space sector, you have to try to find a way to make it viable. And that's something that I think we're struggling with globally. There are some very interesting efforts with Earth observation to monetize these things. But, you know, I've come down to three things that I think what we are trying to do and focus on is heading towards. If you're looking on more an exploration basis, it's not like with low Earth orbit where you can end up yielding a lot of results by having imagery, whether it be radar or image or optical, to monetize. If it's deep space, the way that I've been looking at it mostly at the agency is how do we optimize R&D spend between different sectors, perhaps, you know? I think if you look at the energy sector in particular, it's very interesting because you have certain R&D that can happen on the energy or the healthcare sector. I think the NASA administrator yesterday discussed stuff about the artificial retinas and then also manufacturing with Z-band fiber. These are things where the microgravity environment is conducive to. And on the energy level, even catalysts for ISRU could be something that you would use and yield cost efficiencies in the oil and gas sector. So those types of benefits could be what you look at in terms of the viability. And so we're lucky here in the UAE that we have a vibrant energy sector as well as a healthcare sector. And what we're trying to do, and there are some programs internationally that look at optimizing between the three. That's kind of something that we've been exerting an extra effort in trying to accomplish. There's a pumps and pipes program which is very interesting from the in Houston. It's between the energy sector, aerospace sector, and healthcare sector. And then in Australia they have something very interesting as well called the AROSE, I think, which is looking at ways that autonomous robotic and autonomous operations in the mining sector can be leveraged for space. So every time we find a new way to combine and get more sectors vested in space to yield benefits in their sector or to support the space sector, the better.
Thank you, Talal. I have a question for Hamda. The UAE agency led by many women engineers. Talent is inspiring. What is your secret? Tell us, Hamda, what is the secret of the agency? We have many women engineers. Please.
Because I believe that thankfully that the UAE leadership is trying to push the UAE women to be part of the ecosystem of the UAE. Like we are trying to have equal state for the men and the women. That's why we are having a high number of women in space. I believe we have about 34% of women currently working in the space sector. And many of the leaders here in the UAE are are women. Especially, I believe now they have appointed the chairwoman of the UAE Space Agency, Her Excellency Sarah Al-Amiri, to continue with this.
Yes, and I would like to add on that. Interesting, the space policy and regulations department is dominated by women. So the director is a male. However, all of the team members are females. So go space policy team. So, any Talal, would you like to add on that, on gender balance? Sumaya, would you like to add on that? Please feel free.
Sumaya, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I can just highlight that 60% of STEM graduate are actually women. So this is a very interesting figure. And 50% of the Federal National Council of the UAE constitute of women. So we can see that women is contributing really heavily within the UAE government. And that's because of the encouragement of the leadership. The leadership has been enabled women to contribute, and now the society is enabled by the women. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add that, like, I've been extremely pleasantly surprised by the number of women who have applied to both of our our calls for astronauts. The first one, we had about 4,000 applicants and about 34% or so that were women, and the second call, similar numbers as well. So I'm hoping that we one day, in the not too distant future, see a woman astronaut from the UAE go to space.
Yes. Thank you so much, Talal. I believe we reached the end of our session. I would like to thank you all for attending. It is a great pleasure to present our experience with you all. And I hope that our session was light and joyful for you. If any of my colleagues would like to add anything before we close the session, please feel free. Okay. So thank you, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the sessions in the ISU conference. Thank you.
Thank you all. This is Juan here. Congratulations for a very, very instructive and very well prepared session. Please convey our thanks also to His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Al-Hababi. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Juan. Always a pleasure seeing you, and really appreciate you you being here and joining our session in particular. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.